All right, it's 9:12. I think we got the, I am told that the AHO YouTube live stream is worked out and is working. I think it was working about 5 seconds after I called a little break. It's usually how that works. But please let me know if any of you have reports that we aren't streaming properly and streaming live. I think where I stopped was I was looking to the room to see if there were any other procedural issues before I turned to Mr. Bivens or Ms. Tokar about the offer of KWBA's rebuttal exhibits. All right, with that, then I will.
That would be, I'm sorry, that would be Ms. Tokar. Is she?
Yeah, I'm prepared.
I see Ms. Tokar. Okay. Ms. Tokar, would you like to offer KWBA's rebuttal exhibits into the evidentiary record? And I will ask if you would please identify the particular exhibit numbers and then identify those that have been corrected as well, please.
I would like to offer KWBA's rebuttal exhibits into the record. We sent an email yesterday with redacted and corrected exhibits, and I will offer those. So KWBA 038C, KWBA 039, KWBA 048 through 057C, KWBA 160C, KWBA 161C, KWBA 162 through 165, KWBA 178 and 179C, KWBA 254C, KWBA 255, 256, 257C, and 258C.
All right, thank you, Ms. Tokar. Are there any objections that I haven't already addressed to the acceptance of these exhibits into the evidentiary record for Phase 1B? Then with that, the exhibits identified by Ms. Tokar are accepted into the evidentiary record for Phase 1B of this proceeding. Thank you, Ms. Tokar.
Thank you.
And I have not forgotten, my memory is not so short. Mr. Jacobs, I'll turn to you next. Would you like to offer at this point Kern County Water Agency's cross exhibits on rebuttal? And if you would please identify the numbers of those cross exhibits.
Yes, thank you. And all these exhibits have already been accepted into evidence in Phase 1A. They're not new. It is North Kern 148, and then Bakersfield 35, 37, 40, 43, and 55.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the acceptance of these exhibits used on cross into the evidentiary record? So with that, I will accept the cross-examination exhibits identified by Mr. Jacobs into the evidentiary record for Phase 1B of this proceeding. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you.
Is there anything else we should address before we turn to Buena Vista's witnesses? And then Mr. Becerra, maybe can you just let me know what order you plan on presenting your witnesses in?
Yes, we will call Dr. Littlefield first and then Dr. House.
Okay, thank you. Are you prepared to call Dr. Littlefield at this time?
We are. I saw him on the screen. There you go.
Wonderful. Good morning, Dr. Littlefield. Thank you for joining us once again. Oh, now I'm sorry. Let me make a pause here while we reorient ourselves because now you're off my screen. There we go. Now I see you. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you. If you would please raise your right hand. Dr. Littlefield, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Becerra, you may proceed with your witness.
Thank you. And Ms. Kinsey, just to note, we'll be waiving Dr. Littlefield's presentation in the interest of time.
Thank you.
Dr. Littlefield, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Douglas Littlefield. The first name is Douglas, and the last name is Littlefield, Littlefield.
And Dr. Littlefield, have you previously submitted your qualifications in this hearing?
I have.
Dr. Littlefield, is exhibit Buena Vista 1300 your sir rebuttal testimony?
That's correct.
And are exhibits Buena Vista 1301 through Buena Vista 1319 the exhibits to your sir rebuttal testimony?
That's correct.
And with that, Dr. Littlefield is available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Mr. Bivens, I see you're off mute. Do you have cross-examination questions for Dr. Littlefield?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, Dr. Littlefield.
Good morning, Mr. Bivens.
I'd like to start by asking you a few questions about how professional historians conduct historical analyses. Is it true that that professional historians typically review what are referred to as primary sources in developing their opinions?
Yes, that's correct.
And primary sources can be defined as firsthand accounts of a topic from people who had a contemporaneous connection with it. Is that a fair definition?
In general, that's true.
Isn't it true that professional historians customarily review multiple primary source documents before arriving at their ultimate opinion about a topic?
Yes.
And historians rarely rely on a reading of a single document forming their opinions, right?
Yes.
So I'd like to ask you a question in which I'm going to use the phrase historical context. And I'd like to define that phrase to mean information about the period, the place, and the political, social, cultural, and economic setting for a particular historical event. Are you okay with that definition of historical context?
Yeah, that's fine.
So using that definition, isn't it true that historical context is something professional historians endeavor to understand before reaching their ultimate opinion about an historical document?
That's correct. There are varying degrees of how much other material there is to place a particular document in context. So it really depends on which document you're talking about.
Sure. Isn't it also true that in analyzing the meaning of a particular primary source document, professional historians seek to understand the document in light of its historical context?
Yes.
Ms. Mullen, can we bring up Buena Vista Exhibit 1300, please, and go to PDF page 15, paragraph 31. And Dr. Littlefield, I'm going to use Buena Vista to refer to Buena Vista Water Storage District. Is that all right?
That's fine.
So on line 6, you've indicated that tracking weather-related information was necessary for Miller and Lux to plan diversions and store water at Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then you go on to say that even with such planning, however, there was still considerable uncertainty about how much water would reach the second point of measurement at any given time and how to put those supplies to best use, right?
Yes, that's what I say.
And you'd agree that water from the Kern River flooded the Tulare Lake Bed on a number of occasions over the 20th century, right?
Yes.
The Kern River water reached the lake bed in 1906.
I don't know the specific years, but a number of times is correct.
Some portion of the Kern River water that reached the Tulare Lake Bed in the years in which it did passed the second point of measurement, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Actually, let me back up. We established that over the course of the 20th century, Kern River water reached the lake bed. And you'd agree that some of the years in which Kern River water flooded the Tulare Lake Bed occurred prior to 1914, right?
Yes.
Objection vague and ambiguous as to what the Tulare Lake Bed is.
I think that's fair, Mr. Bivens. Can we back up a little bit and just establish that?
Sure. Dr. Littlefield, have you ever heard the phrase Tulare Lake Bed before?
Yes, I have.
What do you understand the Tulare Lake Bed to be?
The Tulare Lake Bed was a large inland lake, well, the lake itself and then the lake bed, approximately in the location between today's Kettleman City and Corcoran. It varied enormously in size in terms of the water that it held, depending on how much water was coming out of the Sierra Nevada. But at some point, it could extend as much as 75 or 85 miles north and south, and about 40 or 50 miles east and west. And in very rare occasions in the 1800s, sometimes it overflowed into the San Joaquin River.
Thank you. And so based on that understanding of the Tulare Lake Bed, do you understand that Kern River water reached the Tulare Lake Bed prior to 1914?
Yes, not occasionally, but on a few occasions.
Okay. Is it your opinion that Miller and Lux were able to put all of the Kern River water that reached the lake bed to use prior to 1914?
All of the water that reached the Tulare Lake Bed, that they could put it to use? Is that your question?
Let me try again. Is it your opinion that on the occasions when Kern River water reached the Tulare Lake Bed prior to 1914, that Miller and Lux were able to put all of that water to use?
Objection, vague and ambiguous. Are we talking about water that actually entered the lake?
Yes.
Well, I think your question is the answer is sort of self-evident. If it reached the lake, it was not put to use.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Littlefield. Ms. Mullen, can we pull up cross exhibit KWBA 428, please? And I know that were submitted to KWBA's FTP folder, I think last night.
Mr. Bivens, could you please repeat the number? I just didn't catch it through the Zoom link.
Sure, 428.
Thank you.
Dr. Littlefield, this KWBA 428 appears to be a document from the Miller and Lux collection at the UC Berkeley Bancroft Library, right?
This appears to be the box that held documents at the Bancroft Library.
Fair enough. You're familiar with that collection generally.
Extremely familiar.
Let's, Ms. Mullen, can we go to PDF page 3, please? And Dr. Littlefield, do you see that this document appears to be a letter addressed to Mr. James Ogden in Buttonwillow, California?
Yes, I can see that.
And Ms. Mullen, could we please scroll to page 6, please? And this appears to be Henry Miller's signature at the bottom of this letter, right?
Yes, it's pretty tiny on my screen. If maybe we could enlarge it a little bit. Yes, it's Henry Miller.
Okay. And Ms. Mullen, if we could scroll back out, I just want to direct Dr. Littlefield's attention to the top of the document. And this letter at the top right-hand corner of the document, Dr. Littlefield, appears to be dated December 26th, 1906. Right?
That's correct.
Let's go back up to page 3, please, Ms. Mullen. If we look at the last sentence of this page, this letter from Henry Miller to James Ogden, dated December 26th, 1906. The last sentence on this page, which continues to the next one, reads, Now, the prospect as to water is pointing to the danger of another overflow, as there is snow in the mountains and the place is full of water, and there is no room in the reservoir. So we will have to look for the water to come our way. And if you could just take a minute to scroll to the next page, please, Ms. Mullen. Can you confirm that I read that correctly, Dr. Littlefield?
Yes, could you, Ms. Mullen, could you enlarge the text a little bit, please? Yes, I see the sentence. That's correct, the way you read it.
Thank you. So it's fair to say that according to Henry Miller, sometime prior to December 26, 1906, there was the potential for what he called an overflow of water, right?
Yes,
And he describes such overflow as a danger, right?
yes.
And if we could scroll to PDF page 4, please, Ms. Mullen. And let me see if I can find my sentence here. I think I have the wrong page. Can you scroll back up one page, please, Ms. Mullen? There we go. Dr. Littlefield, in the first full sentence at the top of this page, Henry Miller writes, "Therefore, I hope you see the importance of putting up a strong levee and open the canal and have the renters assist and do that work before anything else. We want to protect these people and protect ourselves in the meantime." Did I read those sentences correctly?
Yes, you did.
And if we turn to the next page, please, Ms. Mullen. And in the first full paragraph on that page, Henry Miller writes, "As to Goose Lake, you will not give it any thought nor do any work. What you want to do is carry the water, which comes down from the river, and the canal can carry it, and care has to be taken against backwater and give the water plenty to vent. There is any amount of room for the water north. I hope you will study out how we can guard against another flood, and the land put in grain by us, as well as the renters, will be in danger of being drowned out." Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Isn't it fair to say that Henry Miller is suggesting that the purpose of carrying floodwater past Goose Lake north of Wasco Road would be to protect or guard the people on Miller and Lux's lands to the south of Wasco Road?
Objection. This misstates evidence and vague and ambiguous. The first sentence refers to Goose Lake.
Mr. Bivens, will you restate the question, or you can say the same question? I just want to make sure I'm following the question. If you would say it again, please.
Sure. Isn't it fair to say that in this letter, Henry Miller is suggesting that the purpose of carrying water north would be to protect or guard the people on Miller and Lux's lands to the south of Wasco Road?
Objection. Misstates evidence and vague and ambiguous.
I think that I'll sustain the objection. Mr. Bivens, can you ask, I think you can get there, but maybe try again in a different way,
Sure.
please.
Dr. Littlefield, do you see the sentence that reads, "There is any amount of room for the water north"?
Yes, I see that.
And then the next sentence states, "I hope you will study out how we can guard against another flood, and the land put in grain by us as well as the renters will be danger of being drowned out." Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you understand from this document that Henry Miller was directing James Ogden to carry water north to avoid flooding south of Wasco Road?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Misstates evidence. vague and ambiguous.
I'm going to overrule the objection at this point. I think Dr. Littlefield can caveat his response. You may go ahead, Mr. Dr. Littlefield.
I don't see that it says anything about Wasco Road in this particular letter, unless you can point it to me somewhere else in the letter.
Sure. Do you have an understanding that Miller and Lux's tenants circa 1906 were primarily located south of Wasco Road?
That's correct.
Do you have an understanding of whether Miller and Lux circa 1906 had any tenants north of Wasco Road in Kern County?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Is there anything in this letter that suggests Henry Miller saw high Kern River flows as an opportunity to divert water for irrigation north of Wasco Road?
Objection calls for speculation. This is a cross exhibit.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think I'd like to move this along, and I'd like to get a response. Go ahead, Dr. Littlefield.
Ms. Kinsey, Dr. Littlefield needs to be able to review the whole letter in response to the question.
Let me ask a different question. And I will ask that Dr. Littlefield review the whole letter if he feels like he needs to. Dr. Littlefield, do you see anything in this letter to suggest that Henry Miller's response to the possibility of high Kern River flows in 1906 was to plant more crops?
Objection, misstates evidence. This letter is dated December 26th of 1906.
I think that is a fair objection. Well, trying to think how to cut through this fairly. Maybe, can we back up a moment for my benefit? Dr. Little, when there's some audio, is the audio feedback, it seems to be coming from all ends. Is this a problem for anyone else?
My audio is fine.
Your audio is fine. So maybe it's just on my end. Can we take a pause? And I'm going to try to actually log in and out because I'm getting a little feedback when I'm speaking. And I apologize for that. It must be Zoom doing this again. And we can all take a moment and maybe think about how we can tackle this problem. So please just give me 2 minutes. I'm going to log in and out and we'll pick up where we left off. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I'm back in. This sounds better. I wonder actually if with the heat, we're having a little, I don't know, extra technical problems. So hopefully we won't. What I'd like to do at this point, I think one of my questions is for Dr. Littlefield, just for me, if we can back up, are you familiar with this letter have you had the occasion to review this letter that we're looking at right now?
No, I have not seen this letter before.
Okay, that's helpful to me. So, Mr. Bivens, I'm going to turn to you. I think it is fair if you are going to ask Dr. Littlefield about the contents of the letter that he have a chance to review the letter in advance. We can take a break and allow him to review the letter, or you could be specific in your questioning to what we have up on the screen.
No, Ms. Kinsey, I think the fact that he didn't review it is also helpful. So I'll move on from this particular line of questioning. Let's go back, please, Ms. Mullen, to Exhibit Buena Vista 1300, PDF page 14, paragraph 30. And Dr. Littlefield, in this section of your written testimony, you've indicated your opinion that now I'm getting feedback. All right, hopefully that's better. Dr. Littlefield, you indicated in this.
I also hear the feedback.
Okay.
It is a problem. I apologize. I'm not sure what, it seems to have been corrected for me by logging out and back in, but I'm not sure. And I'm sorry to interrupt your cross this way, but I think it may be worth doing that because as you know, as you can tell, it's fairly distracting.
Yes, it is.
Everyone. So, please go ahead and take 2 minutes. And I apologize to everyone. We'll work through this and let's see if logging in and out will correct it for you.
All right, I'll be back.
Thank you.
Ms. Kinsey, I have returned from Zoom exile.
Good. So far, so good. It sounds like the gremlins have been moved on to someone else.
Well, and one of my colleagues indicated that the audio problem may actually be coming from Dr. Littlefield, which is consistent with what occurred during the last time I cross-examined Dr. Littlefield. And so perhaps I can ask that he mute while I ask my questions and then unmute to respond.
Okay, that would, let's try to proceed that way if you would please, Dr. Littlefield. And I don't see Dr. Littlefield at the moment unless there's a problem with my feed. Now I see you. Thank you. So I will hand things over back to you, Mr. Bivens, and we will work through this as best we can.
Thank you. And Dr. Littlefield, just to see if we can mitigate these audio issues, would you mind muting while I ask my questions and then you can unmute to respond?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so here we are, Exhibit Buena Vista 1300, paragraph 30. And in this section of your written testimony, you've indicated that modifications to Miller and Lux's facilities between 1914 and the early 1950s did not intend to alter quantities of Second Point's water uses, but rather to make using those supplies more reliable and dependable. Is that still your opinion?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you've not cited a source for your opinion that such changes to Miller and Lux's facilities did not intend to alter quantities of Second Point's water uses, right? Oh, you got to come off mute to answer the question.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Did you investigate whether the capacity of Buena Vista Lake Reservoir was ever increased between 1914 and 1952?
No, I did not.
Did you investigate whether the total conveyance capacity available under the Second Point right increased between 1914 and 1952?
No.
Let's pull up KWBA 16, please, Ms. Mullen. which is a copy of the Hyatt report. And the Hyatt report is a document that you considered in developing your testimony in this matter, correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Mullen, once we get to KWBA 16, can we go to PDF page 43, please? Dr. Littlefield, this table contains Hammett's projections of Buena Vista diversions under the second point right under the district plan, correct?
I have not reviewed this table. This seems to me to be an engineering document, so I didn't attempt to interpret it.
Oh, so you did not consider this table in developing your opinion that modifications to Miller and Lux's facilities between 1914 and the early 1950s did not intend to alter quantities of second point's water uses, correct?
Objection, misstates testimony.
I think that's fair. Objection sustained.
Dr. Littlefield, did you consider this table in developing your opinion that modifications to Miller and Lux's facilities between 1914 and the early 1950s did not intend to alter quantities of second point's water uses?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to Exhibit Buena Vista 902, please. And Ms. Mullen, I guess as long as we're in the Buena Vista 900s, I'll ask you to also pull up 924, and I'm going to switch back in between them, but I'll start with 902. Dr. Littlefield, do you recognize this as the transcript on appeal from the title insurance litigation?
Yes, I do.
Ms. Mullen, can we go to PDF page 7, please? I hope I didn't cause Ms. Mullen any difficulties by asking to go to PDF page 7.
Okay, everything's moving slowly this morning. So let's give her a minute.
Okay, and if we go halfway down the page, please, Ms. Mullen. We're about halfway down the page. There we go. A little more, please. Ah, very good. And Dr. Littlefield, do you see where it says Ogden James about halfway down the page?
Yes, I see that.
And you see that he testifies as a witness from page 573 to 697 of the transcript?
That's correct.
Can you just remind us who James Ogden was?
James Ogden, as I recall, was the manager of the Button Willow Ranch for Miller and Lux.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we turn to PDF page 594, please? And right there, that is perfect. And Dr. Littlefield, can you just read the first paragraph on this page to yourself and let me know when you're done?
The paragraph 1750, is that the one you want?
Correct.
You want me to read it out loud?
No, you can just read it to yourself and let us know when you finished.
Okay.
And do you see, Dr. Littlefield, that Mr. Ogden describes Miller and Lux property from headquarters north to the north line of Township 28 as under canals?
Yes, I see that.
And do you understand, Mr. Ogden, to mean by headquarters, the Button Willow Ranch headquarters?
Yes.
Okay. It also says this property up to the north line of Township 28 is in alfalfa, wheat, and barley, right?
That's correct.
And then Mr. Ogden goes on to say that Miller and Lux land north of Township 28 is used for feed purposes, wild feed, right?
Yes.
So Ms. Mullen, can we now turn to Buena Vista 924, please? And perhaps we can zoom in a little bit on the Lost Hills area, which is just below the Lost Hills oil field. It's a kind of a square there with Lost Hills above the square. And maybe, yeah, a little bit more, please. I think I'll take one more zoom, please, Ms. Mullen. That's nope, a little too far. Sorry. Maybe just one out, please, Ms. Mullen. I'm sorry. One click. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. Dr. Littlefield, do you see the red line that appears to extend east from Lost Hills?
Yes, that's Wasco Road.
Okay, very good. You anticipated my question. And if you look over to the left side of the map, you can see notations for townships and ranges, right?
Just a minute, I have to move my inset pictures here. Yes, I can see that.
And Wasco Road appears to be located on the northern border of Township 27, right?
That's correct.
And then Township 28 borders Township 27 on the south, right?
That's right.
So when Ogden was testifying in the title insurance case about land being used for wild feed in the passage we just read, he indicated that even some land south of Wasco Road was used for wild feed, right?
A small area, that's correct.
Okay, and let's go back to Buena Vista 902, please, Ms. Mullen, and PDF page 612. All right, and let me orient myself here with the new zoomed in document. I believe on the third line, Mr. Ogden testifies the northern extremity of the irrigated lands of Miller and Lux, as shown on this map, is in the north line of Township 28 South, Range 22 East. Although we have irrigated some land in Township 27 South, Range 22 East, some of the Goose Lake land, and a little of section 17. I'm sorry, Dr. Littlefield, can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
And a little of section 17 of Township 27 South, Range 22 East, and some of section 15 in Township 27 South, Range 22 East. They have only been partially prepared for irrigation. They have not been completed. The irrigation system has not been completed through that part of the land. Did I read that right?
You will have to go off mute, Dr. Littlefield.
Yeah, yes, you read it correctly.
Okay, and Dr. Littlefield, did the township range and section designations in this area change between Mr. Ogden's testimony in 1913 and 1919?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the map that Mr. Ogden's referring to here. Sometimes township and range surveys did change. I looked at a lot of surveys over my life, and there are times when surveys of townships, ranges, and sections are redone for various purposes. So without seeing the map that Mr. Ogden's talking about, I can't answer your question.
Sure, and let me ask my question a little bit differently then. Do you have any reason to believe that the township range and section designations that Mr. Ogden was testifying to here changed from 1913 to what's represented in the 1919 Lippincott map produced as Exhibit Buena Vista 924?
Objection, vague and ambiguous, calls for speculation. The map's not present.
I just asked him if he has any reason to believe that the sections changed, and I think that's a perfectly appropriate question.
I think it's a fair question. We'll see where this is going, but I'll allow the question. Let's move this along.
I have no reason to think that the townships and ranges changed, but again, I wouldn't want to guarantee it without seeing the map that Mr. Ogden's talking about.
Fair enough, Dr. Littlefield. Let's go back to Buena Vista 1300, PDF page 32, and take a look at paragraph 49, please. And Ms. Mullen, your exhibit procedure looks a little bit different to me today, which is fine. But if you're closing out of exhibits, I'll just suggest that you may not want to close out of exhibit 924 that we looked at earlier, because I will go back to that again.
Thank you for the roadmap. That's helpful. I appreciate it. I think Ms. Mullen appreciates it.
I know the technical difficulties are rearing their head today, so if I can be helpful, I'll try. And perhaps lost in my effort to be helpful was the initial direction to please go to PDF page 32. I'm sorry, Ms. Mullen. And let's scroll down to paragraph 49, please. And then in paragraph 49, Dr. Littlefield, you've stated, indeed, so central to Miller and Lux's business planning were lands north of Wasco Road that the legend to Lippincott's map number 2, shown below, indicates that the green areas north of Wasco Road were to be irrigated from Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. Is that still your opinion?
Yes, it's still my opinion.
And that opinion is based on, I'm gonna strike that. That was not going in the right direction. And your opinion that lands north of Wasco Road were central to Miller and Lux's business planning is based in part on this map number 2, right?
Yes, but not entirely.
Okay. Let's take a look at that map in Exhibit Buena Vista 924, please, Ms. Mullen. And perhaps we could scroll in, Ms. Mullen, on the legend at the bottom left-hand corner of the map. And so, Dr. Littlefield, the legend of this map identifies it as Buena Vista Valley and Kern River Delta, showing property of Miller and Lux with improvements, right?
That's correct.
And the improvements refers to the improvements proposed by the 1919 Lippincott report, correct?
Yes,
So the improvements contemplated by this map were never implemented, right?
that's correct.
And the areas shaded green north of Wasco Road don't purport to accurately represent the area that was historically irrigated with Kern River water north of Wasco Road, right?
I don't think the map necessarily shows that. What it shows is what Lippincott was proposing. I don't think it necessarily reflects what took place before.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was asking. Over the course of your historical research, you've become familiar with the Miller-Hagan agreement, right?
Yes,
And Ms. Mullen, can we pull up North Kern 35, please? And Dr. Littlefield, you recognize North Kern 35 as a copy of the Miller-Hagan agreement?
yes, I do.
Okay, let's go to PDF page 4, please, Ms. Mullen. And Dr. Littlefield, you see the very first line of main body text there reads, whereas the following named persons and corporations, these. And then if we scroll down to PDF page 7, the list of named persons and corporation ends.
Yeah, yes, I see that.
And then the agreement here on page 7 states, and let me see if I can, just starting on this first line here, that each of the companies named above own or claim to own certain lands or interests in lands situated in Kern County. Do you see that?
It's pretty tiny on my screen. If we could kind of blow it up, that would be great. Yes, I see that now.
And then Ms. Mullen, if we could go to PDF page 20, please. And under the heading 17th, Dr. Littlefield, the agreement states that the agreement shall run with, quote, all the land owned or claimed by any of the parties hereto.
Yes, it says that.
And then the agreement goes on to list what I guess I'll call a bunch of townships and ranges. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And do you happen to know whether all of those townships and ranges listed are located in Kern County?
I outlined the areas that were covered by the Miller-Hagan agreement and the on the 1886 William Hammond Hall map that is in my rebuttal testimony. I don't know whether the northern tier of the property or the lands that are listed here, whether that is slightly in Kings County or whether it is all within Kern County. But as I said, it's the Miller-Hagan agreement lands are outlined on that copy of the map that I included in my rebuttal testimony.
Okay, so we could, if we wanted to, we could take a look at, I'm sorry, do you happen to remember which exhibit that was, Dr. Littlefield?
Not off the top of my head, but if you can give me a minute, I've got a copy of my rebuttal testimony here and I can get that for you.
No, that's okay. It was a William Hammond Hall exhibit.
Yes, it was the 1886 William Hammond Hall exhibit. I think Dr. Miltenberger introduced it originally. And I used the same map and put some annotations on it in red. And it's in my rebuttal testimony. And there's a red outline showing the outline of the lands covered, all of the lands covered by the Miller-Hagan agreement.
Okay. In your testimony, your rebuttal testimony, Dr. Littlefield, you identified the lands Miller and Lux owned north of Wasco Road as being approximately 67,340 to 72,740 acres. Is that right?
That was the opinion in the Lippincott report and also in the Thomas Means appendix.
And did you happen to investigate whether all of those acres were contained within the townships and ranges listed here in the Miller-Hagan agreement?
Is your question, did I compare what Lippincott and Means identified as total irrigated acreage? Is it within the Miller-Hagan agreement? Is that your question?
I think my question was slightly different. You identified, based on Lippincott and Means, the lands Miller and Lux owned north of Wasco Road as being approximately 67,340 to 72,740 acres, right?
That's the total that Lippincott had the higher number and Means had the lower number.
Okay, and did you investigate whether all of those reported acreages were located within the townships and ranges listed here in the Miller-Hagan agreement?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. Let's pull up KWBA cross exhibit 430, please, Ms. Mullen. And let's turn to PDF page 3, please, Ms. Mullen. There we are. This is the page. And maybe we can scroll in on the title a little bit there at the top, Ms. Mullen, because even I am having trouble. There we go. So, Dr. Littlefield, this document appears to be entitled History of Buena Vista Water Storage District to July 1st, 1928. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it also appears to be authored by S.T. Harding. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you just remind us briefly who S.T. Harding was?
Harding was a prominent water engineer, and he served as a engineer on behalf of the state engineer, California state engineer, developing the state water plan and also bulletin number 9. And he also did quite a bit of other things throughout California.
Did he have any involvement in the development or the review of the district plan?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And Ms. Mullen, can we turn to PDF page 4, please? And in the second full paragraph of this page, Dr. Littlefield, do you see that Harding discusses the petition for the district filed August 9th, 1922?
Yes, I see that.
And if we go to PDF page 5, please, Ms. Mullen. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Harding writes, it was recommended that the district's petition should not be approved, mainly on account of the poor quality of the lands north of Wasco Road. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's what it says.
And then if we go, I think another, now we're zoomed in a little far. I think 6 lines down from there, where it reads, and maybe we can scroll down just a hair, Ms. Mullen. And do you see where it says, it was agreed by all that the lands were too poor to irrigate, and Miller and Lux withdrew their objection to their exclusion?
Yes, I see that.
You don't disagree with Mr. Harding's statement that Miller and Lux ultimately agreed the lands north of Wasco Road were too poor of quality to irrigate, right?
Well, that's what Mr. Harding says.
And you don't disagree that they ultimately made that agreement?
Objection beyond Dr. Littlefield's technical qualifications.
Dr. Littlefield is a historian, and if he has any other evidence that he's reviewed in the historical record that suggests that the statement is not true, I would like to hear it.
Mr. Bivens, maybe, why don't you ask the question that way? I had trouble actually tracking the disagreeing and the agreeing.
Fair enough.
Okay, please.
Dr. Littlefield, have you seen any evidence in the historical record that indicates that Miller and Lux did not agree that the lands north of Wasco Road were too poor of quality to irrigate?
No, I have not.
Okay. And you've not expressed any opinion that the quality of Miller and Lux's lands north of Wasco Road changed from 1914 to the mid 1920s, right?
I haven't, I'm not a soils engineer. I have no way to evaluate that.
Okay. Did you consider this document in developing your opinion that lands north of Wasco Road were central to Miller and Lux's business planning?
I have reviewed this document. It's from the Water Resources Center archives at the University of California, Riverside. I don't think it was part of my review for my direct testimony or my rebuttal testimony or my surrebuttal testimony, but I have seen it before.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions for Dr. Littlefield, Ms. Kenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. I will look to the room. Does anyone else have questions for Dr. Littlefield? I don't have questions, so I will ask you, Mr. Becerra, first, do you have any redirect for Dr. Littlefield? And if you do, it's a two-part question. If you do you want to take a break before we get to that?
I do have a couple questions. I would like to take a break. In particular, the FTP site does not seem to be functioning quite right, or I need to take a little time. I need to actually be able to review the cross exhibits.
Okay.
Which I haven't been able to yet.
Okay, good. Well, let's take 10 minutes. I will ask my team to take a look and make sure the cross exhibits are available on the download folder, in the download folders, so that you can look at them. If we reconvene, we'll reconvene after 10 minutes, and if you still need additional time, or we'll talk about it then. So let's come back together. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Becerra.
Oh, just thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Becerra, I think I asked Dr. Littlefield about 428 and, well, what was the last one?
430.
And I'll ask that Ms. Tokar email those to you now, in case the FTP site is not working.
I will
Thank you
do
very
that.
much.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I appreciate that. So let's reconvene at 10:22. All right, let's go back on the record. Mr. Becerra, did you have a chance to take a look at those cross exhibits, and are you ready at this time to conduct any redirect of Dr. Littlefield?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Ms. Mon, can you please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 924? And can we please drill down to the Lost Hills designation in the green and yellow there? Dr. Littlefield, do you recall that Mr. Bivens asked you some questions about lands between Wasco Road and the north line of Township 28?
Yes, I recall that.
Do you see on this map, there's something of a checkerboard pattern in that area?
You're referring to just south of Wasco Road?
Yes.
Yes, I see that.
Did other entities besides Miller and Lux own property in that area as of 1919?
Those particular, I think there were 6 sections altogether. And those were originally owned by Frederick Cox, and then became the title insurance lands as a successor to Frederick Cox. And I think at the time of the 1919 Lippincott report, they had been transferred to the Carmel Cattle Company. So they were intervening, alternating sections inside the Miller and Lux properties.
And did that situation of ownership exist as of 1914 to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it did, most definitely.
So when Mr. Ogden referred to Miller and Lux's lands north of Township 28, there were other entities that owned property in that area at the time, correct?
Right. There was the, depending on what year you're talking about, it was either the Frederick Cox lands or title insurance lands or the Carmel Cattle Company. And then as you can see from the outline north of Wasco Road, there was sort of a stair-stepping arrangement of parcels that either were or were not owned by Miller and Lux.
Okay, thank you. On this map, Ms. Mon, can we please scroll up so we can see some more north of Wasco Road? And Dr. Littlefield, do you see the lands in green and brown located north of Wasco Road on this exhibit?
I do.
Based on the historical record, is it your opinion that Miller and Lux was using those lands for cattle grazing or other livestock grazing as of 1914?
Yes, they were.
And was Miller and Lux in at least a significant part a livestock operation?
Very much so.
Would grazing of livestock have been important to Miller and Lux as of 1914?
It was very important. In fact, so in the Button Willow area that thousands of head of cattle were brought in from, in particular, Arizona and also Oregon in order to graze on the Button Willow area lands northward toward Tulare Lake before the cattle were slaughtered for meat purposes.
Thank you. Ms. Mon, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 428? Thank you very much, Ms. Mullen. Can we please go to PDF page 3? And Dr. Littlefield, do you recognize this as the December 26, 1906 letter about which Mr. Bivens asked you some questions?
Yes, I do.
And the author of this letter was Henry Miller himself, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you see at the bottom of the page, there's a sentence that begins, "Now the prospect"?
Let's please, if we can please scroll in, Ms. Mullen. Zoom in, I should say.
And can we please go to the bottom of the page? Thank you. Dr. Littlefield, do you see that sentence that begins, "Now the prospect"?
Yes, I see it.
Can you read that sentence and then ask Ms. Mullen to go to the next page when you need to?
Okay, this sentence reads, "Now the prospect as to water is pointing to the danger of," and Ms. Mullen, if we could go to the next page, please. "Another overflow as there is snow in the mountains and the place is full of water and there is no room in the reservoir, so we will have to look for the water to come our way."
Do you understand the reference to the reservoir to be to Buena Vista Lake Reservoir?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Does that sentence indicate to you that Buena Vista Lake Reservoir was full as of December 26, 1906?
Yes, Henry Miller says there's no room in the reservoir.
So is it accurate to say here that this letter indicates Buena Vista Lake Reservoir was carrying water over from 1906 to 1907?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I have no further redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Based on that redirect, do you have any additional, do you have any recross, Mr. Bivens, for Dr. Littlefield?
I do not. Thank you, Ms. Kenzie, and thank you, Dr. Littlefield.
Thank you. So with that, thank you, Dr. Littlefield. I appreciate you joining us once again. It was good to see you. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
At this point, Mr. Becerra, are you prepared to call your next witness, who I believe is Dr. Howes?
Yes, we need a few minutes to get him set up, but otherwise, yes.
Let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:36 and pick up with Dr. Howes.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can get started. We'll go back on the record. I see Dr. Howes. So at this point, I'll ask Mr. Becerra, are you prepared to call Dr. Howes as your next witness at this time?
Yes, we are.
And good morning, Dr. Howes. I'm glad you could join us again. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Ms. Kinsey. Thank you.
If you would please raise your right hand. Dr. Howes, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Becerra, you may proceed with your witness.
Dr. Howes, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Daniel Howes, that's D-A-N-I-E-L, Howes, H-O-W-E-S.
And Dr. Howes, have you previously submitted your qualifications in this hearing?
Yes, I have.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 1400 your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
And is Exhibit Buena Vista 1401 your summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
Are Exhibits Buena Vista 1402 and Buena Vista 1403 the other exhibits to your testimony?
Yes, they are.
And Ms. Mon, can you please pull up Exhibit Buena Vista 1401? Dr. Howes, using Exhibit Buena Vista 1401, can you please provide a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And Dr. Howes, you may need to sit up a little closer to the mic.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Next slide, please. Ms. Mullins, thank you. So my rebuttal testimony today will cover 3 topics. The first being Ms. Boissevain's critique of my opening analysis on the inclusion of a first point using second point. Additionally, answering the hearing officer's question on second point appropriations north of Wasco Road circa 1914. And finally, Dr. David's comments on my original testimony of appropriations being not valid circa 1914. Next slide, please. So to get started, really briefly, I'm going to discuss how one can compute the first point using second point. It's very simple using the Kern River Water Master records. And if you understand the records and you understand the Kern River operations. So this only applied, the computation anyways, only applied in 1983 and 1998. Although the first point using second point and vice versa, for that matter, is discussed back even in the title insurance case by Mr. Ogden. So before we go through an example of how to compute this, it's important to understand it only occurs during mandatory Isabella flood releases when we're going to compute this. And that in that particular case, and when that occurs, second point group and lower river group receive their entitlements at first point of measurement instead of second point. And so with that, we can lead into the next slide, please. These are copies of the Kern River Water Master records for August 1983. They are in my exhibits, or in Dr. Bell's or Mr. Bell's exhibits, excuse me. The upper table shows some red circles. This is page 204 of the August 1983 Kern River Water Master records. And on August 28th was a mandatory flood release period for Lake Isabella. And we can see there's titles on these tables, one called Buena Vista Water Storage District that refers to second point group, and Hacienda Water District, which refers to lower river. For this date, you can see that underneath there's flow at first point, in both columns, because it's mandatory flood release, those entitlements are measured at first point. The lower table is page 104 for August 1983. And you'll see that there's a green circle for August 28th, noting the total second point flow, not including Kern River intertide flow. So the total second point flow is what should be arriving, or what is actually arriving. The red circles are the entitlements. So the difference between the two give us an idea of whether or not it is first point using second point or first point at second point. So if we subtract the sum of the red circles from the green, simple subtraction there, and it's a positive value, that indicates that less water is arriving at second point than was computed or was measured at first point. Therefore, the losses between first and second point and any unrecorded uses are identified as first point using second point. The vice versa, if the value of the red, some of the red minus the green is negative, that indicates there's more water at second point than there was at first point. So there's first point at second point. So first point water at second point. And that's it. Pretty simple computation for understanding first point using second point water. Next slide, please. So now I'll move on to answer the hearing officer's question for the story rebuttal testimony. Understanding the flows and use on Miller and Lux land or second point group in general north of Wasco Road. Two pieces that need to be addressed. First, we have Dr. Miltenberger's testimony where he states that flows past Wasco Road were in surplus to Miller and Lux's need and later the district's, and the fact that Dr. Davis completely ignored the fact that there were lands north of Wasco Road owned and operated and managed by Miller and Lux. Next slide, please. Dr. Littlefield has now testified that he identified between 67 and 73,000 acres owned and managed by Miller and Lux north of Wasco Road. And starting with the Lippincott and Means map, that's Buena Vista Exhibit 924. I identified the potentially irrigable acres that Miller and Lux land that was contained in Miller and Lux land north of Wasco Road. This irrigated acres was identified by Lippincott in that map. That was my starting point. I'll show you the maps here in a couple slides and we'll talk about them a little bit more. From that, I used a combination of aerial photos and readily available elevation information. The key was the aerial photos. You could actually see and can actually see where the swales and sloughs were, where water would have flowed from the south to the north. You can see where the canals are that were identified in the Lippincott report and continue and exist today. And you can see where there's alkali land and where there's not alkali land. I would say, I wouldn't call it alkali necessarily, having it's a specific term. It's definitely salt. You can see the salt on the surface. It's probably alkali, but not all of it is. Some was identified by Lippincott as very good ground, equal to that of Button Willow, and some was identified as alkali, and most of that I left out of the potentially irrigable acres. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So identifying the irrigable acres, narrowing it down from the original Lippincott map to the likely irrigated acres, using my experience and aerial photos and basic elevation data as a check. identified about 32,000 acres, as I'll discuss in the next slide. Once I found that area, then I applied published crop coefficients. I'll discuss this in a little more detail in a couple slides, and a long-term range of weather-based grass reference ET. In general, it's a very standard approach, crop coefficients times grass reference ET. And at the very basic level, similar to Dr. David's approach, but there's no adjustments, if you will. The period of time was identified when this was likely irrigated based on records in 1938 through 52 on when flows would go past Wasco Road, identified in actual flow records. The magnitudes, because of some differences, would not have been applicable, but the period of time, I believe, would be. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see the map on the left is the upper portion of that Lippincott map, showing the green areas that were irrigable. The brown areas were identified as grazed and not irrigable. They were poor quality lands, and so those I left out of my analysis. You can see that I digitized it in the right image in GIS, just tracing the lines that were available in the map. You can see the Goose Lake Canal a little better in my image on the right. It's the green line in the Fowler Canal, which supplied that area to the east. The lower area just north of Wasco Road, that's kind of in the lower portion of that image. You can see that it's there's a lot of areas that aren't blue. The light blue indicates irrigated. The blanked areas indicate areas within the Lippincott map that I identified would not have been productive, would likely not have been fully irrigated. And of the whole Lippincott area that they identified as irrigable, it was about 48 to 50,000. I narrowed that down to about 32,000 acres in this area that would have likely been irrigated during high flow years. Next slide, please. So once I identified those acreages, I applied two crop coefficients, one for a perched water table condition and one for a lower perched water table condition. We know there's perched water table north of 46 or Wasco Road, excuse me. They're both the same. I kind of go back and forth. Sorry about that. These crop coefficients were in a publication that I published several years ago for irrigated pasture. And I believe that they're a good range of high and low ET. Along with that, I looked at a grass reference ETO published by the Department of Water Resources for the detailed analysis unit that covers this area from 1922 to 2009. This is daily data, but I just narrowed it down to monthly since I had monthly crop coefficients. I analyzed the minimum, maximum, and average year over this period. So these would coincide with, you could think of them as cooler, hot, and an average year. But it has a lot more there's a lot that goes into that, including wind speed, relative humidity, solar radiation. But you get the maximum would be the maximum driver. So we have 3 different year types. And this created 6 different scenarios. So I have confidence that the actual ET of evapotranspiration in the land north of Wasco Road on that 32,000 acres is between 80 and 126,000 acre feet. Considering a relatively good efficiency of between 70 and 80%, That would be an applied water value somewhere between 100 and 168,000 acre feet. The reason that I increased that irrigation efficiency is that inefficiencies would have been part of the water that ran off and went into Tulare Lake to the north, and therefore were non-recoverable. So just to consider what would have actually infiltrated, been stored in the water table for later use potentially. I believe the efficiency.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna object to this. I'm gonna object to this portion of Dr. House's presentation. This testimony about irrigation efficiency relative to Tulare Lake is not in his written testimony.
I'm going to look to you, Mr. Becerra, or Dr. Howes, if he knows. Are you able to respond to that? Is this in the written testimony?
I could barely hear Mr. Bivens. Can he repeat his?
Mr. Bivens, would you please repeat the objection?
The objection is that the relationship that Dr. Howes just described between his chosen irrigation efficiency value and flows to Tulare Lake is not in his written testimony.
I believe it is.
Well,
I believe it's in my technical memorandum, Mr. Bivens.
Yeah, where on your technical memorandum, sir?
I would have to review that. But I believe I did discuss why I selected a higher irrigation efficiency than Dr. Davids did. So,
Ms. Kenzie, I think the fact that Dr. Howes can't point us to his the portion of his technical memorandum.
Can I please respond, Ms.
Hold
Kinsey?
on, hold on. Let's do one at a time. I am going to give you an opportunity to respond, Mr. Becerra. I'm also going to make sure you have time to actually respond to this. We are doing this on the fly, but let Mr. Bivens finish his sentence.
I think the fact that Dr. Howes can't point us to a location in his technical memorandum is pretty indicative of the fact that his technical memorandum doesn't have that information.
I can
All right.
point
All
to
right.
the exact place in the technical
Please.
memorandum.
And also if we can, I believe the technical memorandum is BV 1402, and if that's right, Ms. Mullen, will you please pull it up? We can all look at it, and then Mr. Becerra, if you will point to the section you believe we're discussing, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Mon. Can we please go to the top of page 10? And I believe in the first paragraph, Dr. Howes expressly discusses the irrigation efficiencies he applied.
He doesn't. It says nothing about flows to Tulare Lake.
Give me a moment to take a look at this.
I believe it's contained the entire discussion beginning on page 1 that expresses Dr. Howes' analysis concerned water flowing north of Wasco Road. If Mr. Bivens is saying that he believes that water that actually entered the lake would not have been used for irrigation, that may be correct.
So I'm sorry, I just want to be clear. Dr. Howes said that he developed his irrigation efficiency estimate to in part account for water that would have flowed into Tulare Lake. And there is nothing in this technical memorandum or any other piece of Dr. Howes' testimony that draws that linkage. I totally understand that Tulare Lake, the words Tulare Lake are in this tech memo, and I understand that he's given us his assumption of irrigation efficiency, but that linkage is not in his testimony.
Can I respond? Because I don't think Mr. Bivens understands what.
Well, and I may, thank you, Dr. Howes. I may not understand what, so let's start with this. If you would please, Dr. Howes, if you would back up and start again on this line of your testimony so that I can listen very carefully and make sure we're all following it. That will be helpful, and then we'll pause and address whether or not it needs to be stricken because it's outside the scope of the written testimony. So if you would please.
Sure.
Back up,
Sure.
if you will.
We can stay right here. That's fine. What I have stated is that I used an efficiency, a higher efficiency than one might consider of 70 to 80%, because any worse efficiencies, any efficiencies that would have been below that in this operation would have flowed north of the property into Tulare Lake. I am not accounting or trying to account trying to account for the water that's flowing towards Tulare Lake. I'm expressly trying to not include that in my estimate of 100,000 to 168,000 acre feet.
And Mr. Bivens, does your, based on that, to me, it's a clarification because now I understand it better, but maybe it's not to you. Does your objection change in any way, or does it continue to stand?
Well, it still does, his technical, just to be clear, his technical memorandum does not say provide the explanation that he just gave. So my objection still stands. I do appreciate the clarification that Dr. House is not accounting for flows to Tulare Lake in this, in that description. But yes, my objection still stands because this isn't in his written testimony, and the written testimony is supposed to be his testimony.
Understood, and I agree. Mr. Becerra, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think we have what's really a semantic issue. Dr. House is testifying about effectively watering of pasture between Wasco Road and Tulare Lake. I don't think he's testifying that water was pumped out of Tulare Lake once it reached the lake. And that seems to be what Mr. Bivens is suggesting. Water into the lake was not used.
That's not what I'm suggesting.
And I think, and thank you, Mr. Bivens, thank you, Mr. Becerra. I think I understand the issue. That was not my understanding of what was suggested. I am going to uphold the objection. I agree that this the connection that Dr. House just described is not explicitly in the written testimony. So I will strike that portion of his direct testimony from the record. We will have to figure out how to memorialize that.
Ms.
Yes.
Kinsey, I need some clarification as to what this covers.
Right, so do I, because just all what I understand it covers, and I meant that with respect to the actual transcript. What I understand the objection applies to, and that what I am upholding is testimony about applying a higher efficiency, assuming a higher irrigation efficiency to avoid accounting for water that would otherwise have been applied and then flowed to Tulare Lake, if I'm understanding the testimony correctly.
Correct, Ms. Kinsey.
That's
And
correct.
that is what that testimony is what I am striking from the record.
Okay.
I will leave it to Dr. House with the technical expertise to understand what this means.
Okay, I think he understands, it sounds like, and what I'm not striking from the record, I mean, there's a statement right here that I'm reading about the irrigation efficiency of 75% that he applied, which resulted in this estimated range. And that is, of course, it's in his written testimony, and that is remaining in the record.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you. Mr. Bivens, is there anything else that you think I need to address based on your objection at this point?
Not at this time, no. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience, Dr. Howes. If you would please, if you're able to, you may pick up where we left off.
Sure, I can do that. Ms. Mullins, I think we're on, you know where we're going.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen.
Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Okay, so considering an irrigation efficiency of between 70 and 80%, I estimate the applied water to this pasture land north of Wasco Road would have been 100 to 168,000 acre feet. And next slide, please. The next area that we're going to discuss is the difference or lack of difference between infrastructure during a wet year circa 1914 to when we actually have records, and we're not trying to do a theoretical analysis from 1938 to 1952 prior to Isabella. So the fact is that there really aren't any actual flow records at or past Second Point prior to 1937 that are reliable. And the fact that the infrastructure used during high flow years had the same capacities, or at least the same overall from 1952 to circa 1914. Therefore, appropriations in 1938 through 52 would have been similar because the operations in general, at least in the infrastructure standpoint, were similar circa 1914. Next slide, please. So here's a map that shows the infrastructure in Buena Vista around 1952. We do have infrastructure changes from 1914 to 1938, and I'll go through those now. We have the Alejandro Canal, which you can see kind of in the middle on the right-hand side there, heading to the south. The Alejandro Canal supplies the Maple service area. It replaces the Stein, Buena Vista, and Farmers canals that were first point, alternate second point delivery systems that were discussed by Mr. Ogden in the title insurance case. So during drier years, normal years, the Alejandro Canal would supply the Maples Canal as a replacement to the Stein, Buena Vista, and Farmers canals. During wet years, that area is supplied directly from Buena Vista Lake. The main canal to the north was used during drier years to supply the Button Willow service area to the north, connects directly to the East Side Canal. Again, that was mainly used during drier periods or to increase dry year efficiency, water use efficiency. And then the Buena Vista Lake cells 1, 2, and 3 were constructed in 1950 between 1914 and 1952, really 1938. The cells 1 and 2 were constructed to store water with less evaporation and seepage losses, than having to store it in all 3 cells during normal lower water years, normal to dry years. But the main conveyances, the inlet canal, the outlet canal, and the waste weir were all the same circa 1914 as they were in 1952 and 1938.
And I'm sorry, I need to interpose another objection here to Dr. Howe's going beyond the scope of his rebuttal testimony. And it's on both this slide and the last slide. And I apologize because I actually do want to check and make sure these objections are accurate. But on the previous slide, Dr. Howe's referred to a lack of reliable flow records at and past Second Point prior to 1937. That's not in his written testimony. He refers to a lack of reliable records about diversions, and that is different. And then here on this slide 11, he refers to the river channel conveyance being the main wet year Kern River supply conveyance. It's also not in his written testimony. So I'd ask that those be stricken, and I'd ask that Dr. Howe's be directed to stay within the confines of his written testimony in offering his summary this morning.
Well, let's maybe the
I
clarification.
need to take a moment.
Sure, Mr. Bizarre, you will
Ms.
certainly have a
Kinsey.
moment. My suggestion is going to be that we sounded like there are 2 occasions here, and one we might want to flip back in the slides to see. The other element that I'm working on here is that the PowerPoint presentation was submitted. I realize it was submitted with all of the other exhibits, so it has been available. I realize the written testimony, it should be this with the scope of that. If the presentation is a summary of the written testimony, then it should fall within the scope. But let's take a look at the language.
And I want to specifically point to Dr. House's oral statement that there is a lack of reliable flow records.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
I mean, the statement in
Miss,
the PowerPoint, hang on, Mr. Becerra.
please
The
proceed.
statement in the PowerPoint is also not in his written testimony, and I do appreciate that this was submitted, but the fact is that in preparing for cross, we look at the written testimony and associated technical memoranda. We're not looking at the summary document that should reflect what the written testimony says, and it doesn't, and I think it's unfair that we're doing this.
Ms. Kinsey,
understand.
might I respond about the flow records?
You may respond about all the things, Mr. Becerra.
And so, first of all, as I understand it, Mr. Bivens has 2 points. One is about the lack of flow records before 1937. The other, I have to say, has escaped me at the moment.
We can turn to that later. You'll have your chance.
Okay, so, Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Dr. House's rebuttal testimony exhibit Buena Vista 1400 and go to page 11. I'm sorry, PDF page 12. My apologies. And on lines 2 through 7, Dr. House discusses this exact subject. Moreover, he cross-references specific paragraphs in Dr. Littlefield's testimony in which Dr. Littlefield provided copious historical evidence of the lack of second point flow records. And if Mr. Bivens had wanted to pursue that subject with Dr. Littlefield, he had the opportunity to do so in cross-examining Dr. Littlefield.
Let me, before you jump in, Mr. Bivens, let me anticipate, and I'll ask you this, Mr. Becerra. I think we're making a distinction here between the phrase flow records and what is stated here on lines 2 and 3, as you pointed out, which is actual data to quantify water diversions and use. There would be a difference between flow records and data about diversion and use.
That's correct. That's why Dr. Littlefield testified about how many historical reports he reviewed to ensure that we were accurately stating the situation with second point flow records. I believe there was 12 of them.
Do I need to respond to that?
No, thank you. So unless there's something else, well, here's where I'm at, Mr. Becerra. The written testimony discusses, I understand Dr. Littlefield's testimony may say something else, and we've gone through that. But Dr. Howe's written testimony addresses data about water diversions and use, not flow data. So the statement he made and orally now would seem to be outside of the scope of what is in his written testimony and not.
And I suppose we perhaps attempted to limit our experts to their areas of expertise a little more than other parties.
Mr. Becerra and Mr. Bivens, that's enough. Thank you. Let me approach it this way. I realize there's another part to your objection, Mr. Bivens, but I'm going to strike the statement by Dr. Howes about reliable flow records, but if Dr. Howes would care to revise his oral summary to track what is here in the written testimony in lines 2 and 3 and elsewhere, that would be fine. And we can do that. Before I move on, is there anything else to address on this point before we move to the other half of your objection, Mr. Bivens?
But Ms. Kinsey, just for clarity, in Dr. House's oral presentation, he should stay to no historical records of diversions and use and not flows. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bivens, I'll turn to you if you would care to present the second part of your objection.
The second part of my objection is on the next slide 11 of Dr. House's PowerPoint, which refers to the river channel conveyance being the main wet year Kern River supply conveyance. That is also not in his written testimony.
Well, Ms. Kinsey, it's pretty obvious it was in his PowerPoint.
Hold on for a second. I want to make sure I am tracking here. The main wet year, yes.
I believe Dr. Howes has also provided copious evidence on this point in his case in chief testimony.
I don't know that he did, but this is,
Let's pause here, gentlemen. I'm thinking this through. Give me a moment to, to track this. I think on this one, this is it is in the PowerPoint slide. I realize we asked for a summary, but there is a reason also that I asked for PowerPoint presentations to be submitted with written testimony and exhibits. It's really for exactly this reason, so that we can avoid situations where we have to go through a lot of objections about differences between the slides and what was in the written testimony. Mr. Bivens, this will certainly be a fair area for your cross-examination of Dr. Howes if there are certain points you would like to make about his reference to the river channel conveyance as a quote main wet year Kern River supply conveyance. So on this one, I am going to overrule the objection and allow Dr. Howes to continue his discussion on that point. With that, is there anything else, Mr. Bivens, for now?
no, I hope there won't be anything further, but I guess we'll.
Thank you. So once again, Dr. Howes, thank you for your patience, and I apologize. Well, the interruptions are in the nature of the proceeding, but thank you for your patience. And if you are able to pick up where you left off, you may do so. And you may also, if you care to revise your statement about data and revise it to reference diversions and use, you may do so. I'll note it's also in your written testimony, so there's no need to in your oral summary. I'll leave that to you. You may proceed.
I'll proceed from here. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you.
I believe that I was discussing there's no difference in wet year water routing, in that the river channel conveyance downstream of Second Point, which delivers water to the inlet canal, as well as the waste weir, were in existence pre-1914 as they were in 1952. The main conveyance then back to Buttonwillow service area is the outlet canal, which takes out of Buena Vista Lake and routes water to Buttonwillow service area. Next slide, please. So here's an image showing 1952, that the lake is full. All three cells, which were in existence in 1952, you cannot see them because the entire lake is full. I believe Dr. Davids also showed an image for 1946, also showing Buena Vista Lake as being fully utilized. So during these wet years, you can see that the infrastructure, and you can even see water coming in the inlet at that point. But let's move on from there. This is just to show that Buena Vista Lake reservoir was full. Next slide, please. So we know the infrastructure during wet years was the same circa 1914 as it was 1938 to 52 pre-Isabella. And therefore would not have had any impact on the maximum appropriations. However, there was a difference in overall operations of farming operations within this time frame, because in the 1920s, Buena Vista Water Storage District was formed. The acreage was consolidated from the 78,000 acres, which I identified, which includes the 46,500 south of Wasco Road, which is today's Buena Vista Water Storage District's irrigable acreage approximately, and the 32,000 acres north of Wasco Road that I addressed and identified. consolidated on the current Buena Vista Water Storage District land. This, I believe, would not have had an impact on wet year appropriations, and I'll discuss why that is. Next slide, please. So in order to come to this this conclusion, it's important to give you some background on how I arrived at it. Part of this comes from Mr. Ogden's testimony in the title insurance case, as well as interview notes of Mr. Frank Rice, who was a later superintendent after Mr. Ogden of Miller and Lux property, and a farmer within the Miller and Lux property, what is now Buena Vista Water Storage District, an A. Marchetti. Additionally, it's important to note that I have many years of experience understanding irrigation conveyance, water use, and agronomic practices that were put into these expert this expert opinion. Next slide, please. So circa 1914, Mr. Rice, in an interview in the background material for Bulletin 9, stated, "The game is to farm every year sufficiently to break even and to depend upon the occasional good year to make a killing." I think it's important to understand that circa 1914, up until Buena Vista Water Storage District was formed, that Miller and Lux and other second point users were irrigating all of the land they could. In certain years, if the water wasn't available, they would only be able to irrigate a portion of the land. In other years, when water was available, they would irrigate more. And so we can think of this as a spectrum of irrigated acreage, where you have Mr. Marchetti noting that while at the source they generally get the better of it, Miller and Lux operators do try to proportion the water out equally. I'm paraphrasing here. And during dry years, we have to only apply water to the land that we have water for. So that really shows you how the mentality was to irrigate this land. During wet years, they would maximize the water use. Mr. Marchetti noting that he plants corn in the summertime, almost an afterthought, because in when he was being interviewed, 1919, 1920, dry year, as they note, they have a lot of pasture land on voluntary hay. But during wet years, they would irrigate more and more intensely. Next slide, please. So when they're irrigating more, they're quote unquote making a killing. They are storing hay, storing money for those years when they have dry years. They're not able to irrigate as much. Once the district forms, when the state basically forces Miller and Lux to consolidate the acreage to the 46,500 irrigable acres that are Buena Vista's irrigable acres today, what we see is a more reliable water supply. The reliability allows the farmers, along with additional groundwater pumping, to have more reliable supplies into the summer. The reservoir is still used when water can be used to store it, but the reliability on the farmer side allow them to crop more intensely, and we see that in the cropping records that were published by in the Stanton report, where you see an increase in summer cropping, including corn and cotton, during the years following district formation. So with those, I believe, because you have pre-1914 really less water use per acre, but more acreage, post district formation, fewer acres, increase in water use per acre. Those two will counterbalance each other. And overall, I believe that 1938 and 1952, or through 1952, would, for similar hydraulic periods, would be a reasonable approximation of circa 1914 water use, even though the acreage that's being applied, that water is being applied to is fewer because it's more intensely cropped. Next slide, please. So this kind of summarizes what I just said. Overall demands would have likely been the same. We see that Miller and Lux and Buena Vista have the intention to maximize water use when that water is available. They are intending to sell the land as well. So we see an increase in the number of farmers through the 1930s, almost a doubling or over a doubling from 80 to 185 in Buena Vista in the 1930s. With that, you're looking at the need to provide water more equitably and reliably to more farmers, and those farmers trying to maximize the water use that's available to maximize their income. Next slide, please. So how does this all fit into the circa 1914 estimate of appropriations? Well, that's a good question. So Dr. David's analysis, as I pointed out in my rebuttal testimony, was full of errors and misappropriate assumptions. It was just wrong, as I stated clearly, and there's been no evidence to suggest that it's anything else. What I do believe, though, is that water use in the area, what I do believe is that all the area was an alfalfa. We see that from the records. That should have never been an assumption to start with. Dr. Davids focused his pre-1914, circa 1914, theoretical estimate on the acreages that are currently Buena Vista Water Storage District, which we know isn't correct. We know that there's reservoir storage. There's a significant portion of recharge in the conveyance facilities, neither of which he correctly integrated. The water use per acre was likely a little bit lower pre-1914 than would have been assumed using alfalfa. The inefficiencies that occurred in the 46,500 acres that is Buena Vista, some of those would have passed north of 46 or Bosco Road circa 1914 and been used for irrigation north. So when we consider all of these factors, the pluses and minuses, I still believe that my ballpark estimate of Dr. David's corrections is still valid, even with these acreage north of Wasco Road, because of some of the trade-offs in his misunderstanding of how to compute water use. So I still believe my opinion is that the total water use within the second point group was between 566 and 600,000 acre feet. I think it's a reasonable range, given that we have limited amount of flow information at the time, and even including Wasco Road, I think that appropriation, that ballpark estimate is probably valid. Next slide, please. So this is a summary. I'm not going to go through it line by line. Basically, Ms. Boissevain's rebuttal just showed that she didn't look hard enough or understand the Kern River system well enough to be able to do that computation. And the water use north of Wasco Road, I addressed that as a question that the hearing officer posed. I believe I did that fairly clearly. And my opinion is that, approximately 570,000 acre feet is reasonable. If we look at 1952, the estimate of appropriations was approximately 516 to 522,000 acre feet. Those years were less wet. That year was less wet than 1906 and 1916. Those years would have been more hydrologically comparable to 1969 and 2017. So if the ballpark number of 570 considers that change or that difference in hydrologic period during those very wet years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howes. Mr. Bivens, I'm sure you have questions for cross-examination, don't you?
I sure do.
It's 11:28. I think I don't anticipate that we're going to finish your cross-examination before lunch. What I'm thinking we should do, though, is just take a quick 5-minute break, if we may, and then we'll go for about a half hour and then break for lunch and come back. Does that work for you, Mr. Bivens?
That would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Becerra, do you have any concerns with that approach?
I do not.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 11:33. Okay, let's go back on the record, please. I think I see the relevant faces here for now. And I will turn to you, Mr. Bivens. You may begin your cross-examination of Dr. House.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Howes. I would like to just turn very briefly at the outset to a couple comments you made during your oral presentation. And if we could have Ms. Mullen pull up slide 15, please. And Dr. Howes, I'd just like to make clear, since you've got the text on the left and your map showing your estimated irrigated lands north of Wasco Road on the right, is it your opinion that Miller and Lux was farming hay? Excuse me, or is it your opinion that Miller and Lux was farming alfalfa for hay north of Wasco Road circa 1914 in wet years?
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clearing that up. Part of your presentation, I can't remember whether it was on this slide or one of the next ones, Dr. Howes, but you talked about the relative intensity of water use pre and post formation of Buena Vista Water Storage District. Is that a fair characterization of your oral testimony?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and I thought I heard you to say that you believe that it was your opinion that there's more water use post formation of the district on less acres, but less water use and more acreage prior to the formation of the district, and that roughly balances out. Is that a fair characterization of your opinion?
No, it's not.
Okay, can you help me understand what your opinion was exactly?
Yes, I stated that the water use per acre was higher with fewer acres. The water use per acre was less with more acres. So when you compare those side by side, the overall water use would have been similar.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Ms. Mullen, can you please pull up Dr. Howe's written testimony, which is Exhibit Buena Vista 1400, and go to PDF page 7, paragraph 13, please.
Dr. House, can I ask you to scoot forward a little bit and keep your voice up? I'm struggling a little bit to hear you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
And Dr. Howes, you've written in paragraph 13 here, Miller and Lux's original 1922 proposal to organize Buena Vista included proposed floodwater service to lands north of Wasco Road. You'd agree that when Buena Vista was actually organized, the district plan did not provide for floodwater service to lands north of Wasco Road, right?
I believe that the district boundaries were limited to areas up to Wasco Road. I am not sure whether or not there was other agreements or other things in place that would have provided for flows north of Wasco Road.
Was there anything in the district plan specifically, Dr. Howes, that you understood to provide floodwater service north of Wasco Road?
Which plan are you?
Objection beyond the scope of the rebuttal.
I think that's fair. I also, just as a matter of time, I think I understand your point, Mr. Bivens. So if you would please move on to the next question.
Fair enough. Dr. Howes, let's take a look at paragraph 14. And you've stated in the sentence that begins on line 15, some first point water would have likely reached the area north of Wasco Road by bypassing second point through Goose Lake Slough. Is that right?
That's correct.
you haven't quantified the amount of first point water that reached lands north of Wasco Road via Goose Lake Slough prior to 1914, right?
No, I have not.
Okay. You also, do you think that first point water that may have reached lands north of Wasco Road via Goose Lake Slough became a part of Miller and Lux's second point right?
Objection, calls for a legal conclusion.
I think that's fair. I mean, I can parse through it, but I don't think that will get us anywhere, Mr. Bivens. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. Dr. Howes, you're not suggesting that Buena Vista now has a right to divert whatever amount of demand north of Wasco Road that was met by first point water via Goose Lake Slough, are you?
Objection, calls for a legal conclusion.
I think I'd just like to know if that's his opinion. I'm not
Where,
asking you to
Mr.
draw.
Bivens, if we can back up, where are you going with this? But I'm trying to follow, but
Well, Dr. Howes has offered a fair amount of testimony here about the relationship between first point water that would have likely reached the north of Wasco Road area. And I'd like to understand what his opinion is about the nature of that water. I mean, the implication here is that somehow that's become a part of Miller and Lux's right, and by extension, Buena Vista's right. And I'd simply like to know if that's in fact what Dr. Howes is saying.
Hearing Officer Coonsey, I've been quiet through all of this proceeding. I'm going to interpose an objection, also vague and ambiguous as to first point water. So you're talking about water measured at first point. So are you talking about first point entitlement water? Those are two different things.
I just
let's stop here. So this is what I'm on this point. I think this does call for a legal conclusion. My normal response in that situation is the hearing officer is perfectly capable of working through it. In this case, because we're on cross-examination, I just don't think this line of questioning is going to be helpful for me. Frankly, I don't think Dr. Howe's characterization of water, first point water that then ended up north of Wasco Road is his legal characterization of it is relevant. So Mr. Bivens, unless you want to tie this back to Dr. Howe's technical analysis, I think that would be fine. But I don't think this line, I'm not going to allow this line of questioning because I don't think it's helpful.
Okay, understood. Dr. Howes, in the last sentence of paragraph 14, you state, which water source contributed how much to the Kern River water that flowed north of Wasco Road circa 1914 depended heavily on hydrology and likely varied depending on the timing and level of the flood flows in any given year. Is that right?
What it states, that's what I state.
Okay, and that's your opinion?
Yes.
Okay. You've not conducted a quantitative analysis to offer an opinion about the extent to which demands north of Wasco Road were met with first point or second point water, right?
No, I am not.
But according to, if we look at the first sentence of paragraph 15, please, Ms. Mullen. You think it's possible to get a sense of what that mix of water sources probably was from agreements from the 1960s. Is that your opinion?
Given the lack of information that we've found, I don't know that there's a better method to try to analyze that. It would be my sense that this would probably give you some ideas on how that water was split out.
So you think it's appropriate to get a sense of what water sources may have met demands north of Wasco Road circa 1914 using documents that were written a half a century later? Is that right?
I don't know that I would characterize it that way, but I don't know that there's another way to do that, Mr. Bivens. I think that if my entire process here was partly to say that, hey, actual data is better than theoretical data. I still believe that's true, and that's my expert opinion. 1938 was a year when we started to have continuous reliable records, and 1938 through 1952. So we're already relying on records that are in the future. A lot of the information on this agreement that was based on the agreement was from this 38 to 52 period. So it all ties together in that it seems likely that the circa 1914 is similar to the way it was circa 1938 to 52.
So Dr. House, is it typical practice in the engineering field to determine which sources of water may have met demands in a particular area circa 1914? You actually strike that. That's a bad formulation. Is it typical practice in the engineering field to extrapolate which particular sources of water may have met estimated irrigation demands in a given area circa 1914 based on legal agreements from the 1960s?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's, if we can go to paragraph 16 of Dr. Howe's testimony, please, Ms. Mullen. You've indicated that in 1964, North Kern, Buena Vista, and other parties signed an amendment to the Miller-Hagan Agreement, which was submitted as Exhibit North Kern 40, right?
Yes.
And you've specifically cited PDF pages 14 through 15 of North Kern 40 for the proposition that Buena Vista and other second point group would have a right to use more than 1/3 of the Kern River's unregulated flow during the March through August season in some conditions, but also that those parties would have a quantified right to show 1/3 of the river's unregulated flow above 1,500 CFS in the September through February season. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and by the word show on line 16, did you mean use?
Yes.
Okay. In the next sentence of paragraph 16, you state your opinion that this recognition of Buena Vista as having rights in the March through August season and the September through February season that were not quantified in the original Miller-Hagan agreement at least suggests that the parties with rights to use Kern River water recognized that Buena Vista and its predecessors had previously used a portion of the first point passing second point water and probably in some amounts north of Wasco Road. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
And so let's pull up North Kern 40, please, Ms. Mullen. And let's go to pages 14 and 15. So Dr. Howes, take the time you need to refresh your memory of these 2 pages of North Kern 40, if you need to. But isn't it true that there's no mention of the use of water north of Wasco Road circa 1914 on these 2 pages of this agreement?
Can you scroll down, please, Ms. Mullins? Can you pause right there, please? Okay, can you continue? Just a little bit further. Right about there. Thank you. That's not necessarily true, Mr. Bivens.
Okay, can you point me to the language that you think mentions the use of water north of Wasco Road?
I believe that the downstream group would have been the use downstream of Wasco Road. Although it's not Miller and Lux use, it is, I think, part of an area that was downstream of Wasco Road.
And this
North of
agreement,
Wasco Road.
north of Wasco Road, and this agreement doesn't refer to use by that group, Second Point Water circa 1914, right?
No, it doesn't. I'm just saying that there was some mention of some use north of Wasco Road on these pages.
Via the reference to the downstream group.
That's right.
But you're not offering an historical opinion based on this document, right?
Well, no, I'm not.
Okay, great. And just to be clear, there's no mention of Miller and Lux's use of first point passing second point water on these 2 pages of this amendment to the Miller-Hagan agreement, correct?
I don't see that stated explicitly. They may have called it something else, but
Okay, do you know what else they may have called it?
I don't off the top.
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
Mr. Bivens, was your question, do you know what else they have called it? Am I remembering your
Yes.
question correctly?
Yes, and and of course, he said they may have called it something else. So I asked him if he knew what else they may have called it.
So overruled. You may respond, Dr. House.
Yeah, I am not aware what else they may have called it.
Okay, thank you. Let's pull up exhibit KWB 308, please, Ms. Mullen. And Dr. Howes, this exhibit was previously admitted into evidence, is entitled Buena Vista Water Storage District, Summaries of Miller, Hagan, and Related Agreements. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And Ms. Mullen, can we scroll down towards the bottom of this page, please? And do you see that in the bottom right portion of this page, Dr. Howes, that this document appears to have been prepared by H.K. Russell, dated April 1996?
Yes, I do.
And you're aware that H.K. Russell was the general manager of Buena Vista Water Storage District for a number of years, correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and let's go to PDF page 136, please, Ms. Mullen. Do you see that this is an introduction to the 1964 amendment of the Miller-Hagan agreement discussed in your testimony?
Objection beyond the scope of the rebuttal. This document has nothing to do with Dr. House's testimony.
He's offered an opinion about this 1964 Miller-Hagan agreement, and I think I'm entitled to ask him questions about that opinion.
I am going to allow us to move forward at least to get to the question. So I'll overrule the objection for now, but you may raise it again, Mr. Becerra.
Thank you.
So, and actually, maybe I can short circuit some of this since this document is already in the record. Dr. Howes, did you consider H.K. Russell's summary of the 1964 amendment of the Miller-Hagan agreement and reaching your opinions about that amendment?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kenzie, I think I'm done with this particular line of questioning, and I'm happy to keep going, but this might also be a good time for us to take a break.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. I think probably for everyone, it would be a good time to take a break. Let's go ahead. We'll do just an hour. It's 11:54 a.m. I would plan to come back at 12:55 p.m. Before we break, is there anything anyone would like to raise that we should take a look at or do over the hour break here? All right, well, thank you very much. Let's, please do log out or you will be removed from Zoom, and I will see all of you back at 12:55. Thank you.